The roar of the crowd was a phantom limb, an ache in a place that no longer existed. Elvis Presley stood in the opulent quiet of his Graceland living room, the grand piano shimmering under the chandelier, untouched. Outside, the Memphis sun beat down, but inside a chill had settled deep into his bones. The sequin jumpsuits hung in his closet, silent witnesses to a life that had become an endless, dazzling performance. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture that once would have ignited 1,000 flashbulbs. Now, only the dust motes danced in the sliver of light from the window. He was El here, just El, not the king. And El was bone-tired, not the physical exhaustion of touring, but a soul-deep weariness that settled in. When the last note faded, the last echo of applause died and the adoring screams dissolved into the vast, empty space of his own mind. That was the haunting part. The silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was a hungry void, devouring the joy he thought he'd felt. On stage, he was alive, electric, channeling, a primal energy that made millions swoon. Off stage, he was a man adrift, anchored only by the gilded cage of his own legend. He walked to the window, peering out at the lush grounds, the famous gates. Beyond them, life churned oblivious to the hollow feeling festering within the mansion. He saw fans sometimes lingering at the gates, hoping for a glimpse, a sign. He felt a pang of guilt, knowing he couldn't give them what they truly wanted, the vibrant, larger-than-life Elvis they saw on TV. That Elvis was a costume he wore, and lately the threads felt thin, fraying. Problem was, he didn't know who El was without the costume. He'd been Elvis for so long the lines blurred, then vanished. His childhood, his dreams of being a gospel singer, the raw talent discovered in Sun Studios. It all felt like a distant dream, belonging to a different person. He was a product, now a brand, and the constant demand to be on had worn him down. He remembered a show in Vegas a couple of years back. The energy had been incredible. He'd belted out, suspicious mind, sweat pouring, his voice a powerful instrument. Crowd had been a sea of adoring faces, hands reaching, shouts, "We love you, Elvis," and for those 90 minutes, he'd felt truly alive. Then the curtain fell, the lights dimmed, the roar became a murmur, then silence. He'd walked off stage, the adrenaline draining, leaving him with an immense cold emptiness. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, looking into an abyss. His manager, Colonel Parker, would have celebrated counting the receipts. His entourage would have cracked jokes, high-fived. Elvis would just retreat to his hotel suite, the lavishness feeling oppressive, the silence deafening. He'd look in the mirror, not seeing the iconic superstar, but a tired man with haunted eyes. He picked up the framed photo on a nearby table. It was of him, young, vibrant, guitar in hand, a playful smirk on his lips. His mother, Gladys, had taken it. A simpler time, before the gold records, before the sold-out stadiums, before the King moniker became a crown that felt more like a weight. He missed her fiercely. Her uncomplicated love, her grounding presence. She wouldn't have cared if he was Elvis Presley, the biggest star in the world, or just her sweet boy, El. He put the photo down gently. The memories were a bittersweet torment. They reminded him of a time when the music had been enough, when he sang because it filled him, not because it was expected. He hadn't just lost his way. He felt he'd lost himself entirely. The telephone rang, a jarring sound in the quiet. He ignored it. It would be business, another demand, another expectation. He just wanted to be still, to think, to find a way to quiet the echoing silence that was louder than any screaming crowd. He knew he couldn't go on like this. The emptiness was a slow poison seeping into every corner of his existence. He needed to find a new song, a new melody, one that resonated with his own heart, not just the world's insatiable desire for Elvis, but how. He felt trapped, a gilded bird in a very large, very beautiful cage. He walked into the kitchen, the grand untouched kitchen designed for a king, yet so rarely used by him. There was a housekeeper, Mary, a kind woman who had been with the family for years. She was humming softly as she tidied a simple old hymn. It was a familiar tune, one his mother used to sing. For a moment, the haunting silence in his mind seemed to lessen. Just a whisper. He paused, listening. Her hum was genuine, unassuming. It held no demand, no expectation, just simple, heartfelt peace. He wondered fleetingly what it would be like to feel that kind of peace again. The days blurred into a monotonous rhythm, waking late, wandering the vast rooms of Graceland, watching old movies, picking at food. Mary brought him the guitar, sat in its case unopened. The piano gathered dust. His voice, once a powerful instrument, felt rusty, locked away. Tried to sing sometimes, just a low hum, but it felt forced, the joy gone. It was like a well-loved song played so many times that its magic had faded. He missed the uncomplicated joy of making music. He remembered nights at the Louisiana, hair-eyed, the small stages, the raw energy, the feeling of pure connection with the audience, not because he was Elvis, but because he was a young man pouring his heart out now. It felt like a job, a heavy suit he had to wear. His closest friends, the Memphis Mafia, were still around, of course. They were loyal like family in their own way. But even their presence sometimes felt like a reminder of his gilded cage. They were there to protect Elvis, to keep the show going, to manage his life. They rarely saw El, and El felt too weary to try and show himself. One afternoon he found himself in his old bedroom, the one he'd had as a teenager before Graceland was purchased. It was simpler, smaller, holding memories that felt more real. He opened a dusty box in the back of a closet. Inside were old records, 45s with worn sleeves, gospel albums, blues and country. He pulled out a worn copy of a Mahalia Jackson record, her powerful voice promising solace. The music filled the room, rich and soulful. Mahalia's voice soared, pure and unburdening. He closed his eyes, letting the melodies wash over him. It was the music that had first stirred his soul, the music that had made him dream. But even as he listened, the familiar emptiness crept back. He admired her voice, but he couldn't feel it in his own heart anymore. He felt disconnected, like an empty vessel. Picked up a newspaper someone had left on his bedside table. The headline screamed about his latest album. His upcoming tour dates. He read the words, Elvis Mania. The King reigns supreme. It felt like they were talking about someone else. A fictional character. He felt a detached curiosity, as if reading a story about a stranger. He sighed, tossing the paper aside. What was the point of all this? The fame, the money, the adoration. It hadn't brought him joy. It had brought him isolation. He yearned for something real, something tangible, connection that didn't involve flashing lights or screaming crowds. Mary, the housekeeper, appeared at the doorway, her kind eyes assessing him. She didn't often intrude, but her intuition was sharp. You look tired, Mr. Presley, she said softly. Would you like some iced tea? I just brewed a fresh batch. He nodded, grateful for her quiet presence. That'd be nice, Mary, thank you. She left, and he heard the faint clinking of ice in the kitchen. Mary was one of the few people who treated him like a human being, not a legend. She saw the man, not the myth. He wondered how she did it, how she maintained her simple, grounded demeanor amidst the chaos that constantly swirled around Graceland. A thought flickered in his mind. Something his mother used to say, son, happiness ain't something you get from outside. It's something you gotta find inside yourself. He used to dismiss it, thinking happiness was the roar of the crowd, the thrill of the stage. But now those external joys felt like a temporary fix, a sugar rush that left him crashing harder. He remembered a small, forgotten charity event he'd attended once years ago, before he was quite so famous. It was in a small church hall. He'd played his guitar, just him, and his voice, for a group of elderly people and children. No fanfare, no lights, just shared music. And he'd felt a warmth then, a simple pure joy that had nothing to do with fame. He'd forgotten that feeling, buried under layers of expectation and performance. He wanted that feeling back. He wanted to feel the music in his soul again, not just in his voice. He wanted to connect with people on a genuine level, not just as the king. The idea of stepping outside Graceland, outside his protective bubble, felt terrifying. The world outside those gates was a place of constant demands, a place where he was always on. How could he find quiet happiness in such a noisy world? The melody of his life felt like it was fading, and he didn't know how to bring it back into tune. The next morning, a small package arrived at Graceland, delivered by a regular mailman, not the usual special couriers. It wasn't fan mail in the usual sense, no adoring letters, no gifts. It was a worn handmade quilt, simply folded, with a small, neatly written note tucked into its folds. Mary brought it to him while he was sitting on the porch nursing a cup of coffee. "This came for you, Mr. Presley," she said, her brow furrowed in mild curiosity. "From an address in Tupelo, Mississippi. Tupelo, his hometown." A jolt went through him. He hadn't been back in years. Not really. Not since he'd become Elvis. He took the package, unfolding the quilt. It was a simple patchwork of faded blues and yellows, stitched with care, clearly old. The fabric felt soft and familiar beneath his fingers. He unfolded the note. It was written in a slightly shaky hand, but clear. "Dear Mr. Presley, my name is Eleanor Vance. My grandmother, Martha, made this quilt. She was a simple woman, worked hard, and loved your music more than anything. She passed away last month, peaceful and quiet. She always said your voice reminded her of the hills back home, and that even when you were singing to thousands, it felt like you were singing just to her. This quilt was her favorite. She said it kept her warm when she was lonely. No demands, just a quiet offering, a gentle understanding. Lonely, she knew. She understood." The quilt was a tangible piece of home of a past he'd almost forgotten. It wasn't about the king. It was about the boy from Tupelo, the one Martha had seen, the one who still existed somewhere beneath the layers of fame. It felt like a small, unexpected hand reaching out, not for his autograph, but for his heart. He hugged the quilt to him, feeling the warmth of its history, the silent comfort it offered. It wasn't grand, wasn't flashy, but it felt more real than any gold record. A few days later, the Memphis heat became oppressive. He found himself drawn to the idea of a simpler time, a quieter place. He thought about Tupelo, not the fan-mobbed historical site it had become, but the sleepy town he remembered. On a whim, or perhaps a desperate impulse, he told his security to prepare a discreet car. "Just me and maybe Red," he told Red West, one of his longtime bodyguards who was also a friend. "And I want to go to Tupelo. No fanfare, no announcements, just a drive." Red raised an eyebrow but nodded. He knew Elvis well enough to recognize the quiet desperation in his voice. The drive was long but peaceful. As they left the sprawling suburbs of Memphis, the landscape gradually changed, becoming greener, more rolling. Elvis watched the fields pass by the small towns, the everyday lives unfolding outside his tinted window. He saw children playing baseball, old men rocking on porches, women hanging laundry. It was a world he hadn't truly seen in years. They arrived in Tupelo as dusk settled, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple. Red had found a small, unassuming motel on the outskirts of town, one that rarely saw tourists. Elvis checked in under an assumed name, a rare moment of anonymity that felt both freeing and strange. He couldn't go to his childhood home. It was a museum now. But he knew the old church, the one where he'd first sung, where his voice had first found its power. He drove there later that evening, the streets quiet and dimly lit. The church was modest, a humble building that held more history for him than any grand concert hall. He got out of the car, heart pounding a little. He felt a deep sense of trepidation mixed with a strange kind of hope. As he approached the entrance, he heard faint music from inside. It wasn't rock and roll, it was gospel, a choir practicing. He paused at the doorway, unseen in the shadows. Their voices were earnest, pure, filled with a simple faith. He recognized the melody of Amazing Grace. He felt a tear sting his eye. This was the kind of connection he craved. Powerful, soaring voices filled the little church, echoing with something more profound than applause. He listened, hidden, his heart stirring with an unexpected tenderness. It was a new note in the fading melody of his life, a soft, quiet one that promised healing. And for the first time in a long time, the haunting silence in his own mind felt a little less vast, a little less empty. Elvis stood in the shadowed doorway of the church for a long time, just listening. He wasn't Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. Here, he was just a man hiding in the dark, hungry for the purity of the sound. The voices, strong and true, reminded him of his earliest dreams, of singing in a way that wasn't about fame, but about feeling. He heard a cough behind him and turned to see Red, who had silently joined him. Red didn't say anything, just stood there, a quiet, solid presence. Red understood more than most. He'd seen Elvis at his highest highs and his lowest lows. The practice eventually ended. The lights within the church flickered off one by one, and a few people emerged, chatting quietly as they walked to their cars. Elvis ducked further into the shadows, not ready to be seen, not ready to break the spell. The next morning, Elvis woke early. An unusual occurrence. The small motel room felt plain but strangely comforting. No endless corridors. Just a bed, a dresser, and a small window looking out onto a quiet street. He decided to explore Tupelo, but not the tourist spot. He wanted to see the town as it really was, beyond the myth. He donned a simple cap and sunglasses, a regular jacket, clothes that made him blend in rather than stand out. Red drove, but Elvis directed him down side streets through residential areas past small local businesses. He saw kids riding bikes, their laughter echoing in the morning air. He saw an old man tending a small garden, his hands calloused and strong. He saw a woman hanging laundry on a line, humming as she worked. These were scenes of everyday life, simple, unglamorous, yet filled with a quiet dignity. He realized how long it had been since he'd truly seen these things. His world had been so insulated, so focused on himself and his career, that he'd forgotten the rich tapestry of ordinary existence. They stopped at a small, no-frills diner. The kind where the coffee was strong and the waitress knew everyone's name. Elvis, under the assumed name Mr. Johnson, ordered a simple breakfast: bacon, eggs, grits. He ate slowly, savoring the taste, but more importantly, savoring the atmosphere. People chatted, laughed, read newspapers. No one paid him any special attention, which was exactly what he craved. He heard snatches of conversations about crops, about local gossip, about the upcoming high school football game. It was refreshingly mundane. A young girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, sat at a nearby booth with her grandmother. The girl was drawing intently on a napkin. Her grandmother, a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, noticed him looking. She nodded politely. Elvis nodded back, a small, genuine smile playing on his lips. He overheard the girl talking to her grandmother. "Grandma, do you think Elvis Presley ever comes here?" she asked, her voice hushed with awe. "My mama says he used to live in Tupelo." His heart skipped a beat. He lowered his head, stirring his coffee. "Oh, honey, I'm sure he's too busy for a place like this," the grandmother replied, patting the girl's hand. "He's a big star now, but you know he was just a regular boy once. Right here in Tupelo, my mother, God rest her soul, always said he had a kind spirit." Elvis swallowed a lump in his throat. It was the second time in days he'd heard about the kind spirit of the boy from Tupelo. It was a powerful reminder of who he once was, before the world started calling him king. The girl continued, "I wish he'd come back, just once. I bet he misses the quiet." She looked out the window, her gaze thoughtful. "Mama says he lives in a big house now, but maybe it's lonely." Elvis nearly dropped his coffee cup. Lonely, the word hung in the air, a direct arrow to his heart. This little girl, innocent and perceptive, understood a truth that most adults, even those close to him, failed to grasp. She saw beyond the glamour, beyond the fame, to the human beneath. He glanced at her again. She had a mop of unruly brown hair and earnest eyes. She wasn't clamoring for an autograph or screaming his name. She was just a girl, thinking about a man she admired, wondering if he too felt the ache of isolation. He wanted to reach out, to tell her, "Yes, honey, it is lonely, so incredibly lonely." But he couldn't. He was Elvis, hidden in plain sight. But her words resonated deeply within him. It was a gentle nudge, a reminder that the world was full of people who saw him, not just a persona. He realized that perhaps the way out of his emptiness wasn't through grand gestures or performances, but through simple, honest connection, just like this one. Here, in a humble diner in his hometown, he felt a flicker of warmth, a tiny spark of hope he hadn't felt in years. The silence was still there, but now it felt less haunting, less empty, perhaps just waiting for a new, quieter song to fill it. For the rest of the day, the little girl's words echoed in Elvis's mind. Maybe it's lonely. He spent more time just observing rather than trying to escape his thoughts. He saw the resilience, the quiet joys, the simple routines that made up life in Tupelo. It was grounding, a stark contrast to the manufactured chaos of his own existence. He and Red drove aimlessly for a while, eventually passing by a local community center. A sign out front advertised a spring fling bake sale and talent show for charity, benefiting the local animal shelter. There were kids running around tables. It looked messy, enthusiastic, and genuinely communal. Elvis felt a pull, a strange curiosity. "Pull over, Red," he said. Red looked at him surprised. "Just for a minute? Let's see what they're up to." They got out of the car, Elvis adjusting his hat and sunglasses. He blended into the small crowd. The air buzzed with activity. Laughter shouted instructions, the smell of freshly baked cookies. It was a world away from the controlled environment of Graceland. He saw a group of teenagers setting up a small, makeshift stage. One girl was struggling to get a microphone stand to work. Another was trying to tune an old, battered guitar. Their enthusiasm was infectious despite their obvious lack of professional equipment. Elvis watched them, a faint smile touching his lips. He remembered being that age, just starting out, eager to play music for anyone who would listen, the pure joy of it, before the pressures began. He noticed the young girl from the diner, the one who wondered if he was lonely. She was there too, helping an older woman arrange cupcakes on a table. She looked up, and for a split second their eyes met. He quickly looked away, worried she might recognize him, but she just smiled a sweet, open smile, and then went back to her task. She didn't see Elvis Presley, the king. She saw a quiet man watching the commotion. He saw a flyer on a bulletin board detailing the talent show. All ages, welcome, singers, musicians, poets, comedians. Below it, a handwritten note, "Bring your own instrument." An idea, wild and unexpected, began to form in his mind. "You think they'd mind if someone just played a song or two?" he murmured. Red, ever practical, shrugged. "Depends on who it is, boss, and if you got an instrument." Elvis thought of the old beat-up guitar he'd seen earlier, the one the teenager was struggling with. He was a professional, of course, but it had been years since he'd just played. No pressure, no expectations, just for the pure love of it. He walked over to the young girl who was struggling with the guitar. "Looks like you're having some trouble there," he said, his voice a low rumble. She looked up, startled. "Oh, sir. Yeah, this old thing, my granddad's. It's kinda out of tune." She had the same kind, earnest eyes as her grandmother. "Mind if I take a look?" he offered, extending a hand. "I used to play a bit." She hesitated for a second, then brightened. "Oh, sure. Go ahead." She handed him the guitar, took it, the familiar feel of the wood in his hands sending a jolt through him. He checked the tuning pegs, adjusting them with practiced ease. He strummed a chord, then another. The sound was rough, but he coaxed a clearer tone from it. He played a simple blues riff, just a few notes, but they were precise, soulful. The girl's eyes widened. "Wow, you really do play. That sounds amazing." He smiled, a genuine, easy smile that rarely made it to his public appearances. "Just a little practice," he said humbly. He played a few more notes, a melody from a gospel song. Suddenly, an older gentleman, balding and with spectacles perched on his nose, approached them. He was clearly in charge, wearing an apron that said, "Bake Sale Boss." "Everything all right here, Melody?" he asked the girl. Then looked at Elvis. "He's helping me tune the guitar, Mr. Henderson," Melody said, excited. "He's really good." Mr. Henderson eyed Elvis, a flicker of recognition in his eyes, or perhaps just a general sense of someone important, but he didn't press. "Well, that's mighty kind of you, sir. We're looking for acts for a talent show tonight. You know, for the animal shelter. Nothing fancy, just good fun." Elvis paused. The thought was terrifying, exhilarating to play anonymously for a small-town crowd, for a cause, no pressure, just music. It was the direct opposite of his usual grand performances, but it also felt like a chance to rediscover the pure joy of it. I might," he said, handing the guitar back to Melody, now perfectly in tune. "What time does it start?" 7 o'clock sharp, Mr. Henderson beamed. "Just put your name down on the list inside." Elvis nodded. He looked at Melody, whose face was alight with admiration. He saw no greed, no demands, just a genuine appreciation for music. This was it. This was the unsung harmony he'd been missing, the chance to simply be a musician, not a legend. He felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The silence was still there, but now it felt less like a void and more like a quiet canvas, waiting for a new, heartfelt melody to be painted upon it. He decided then and there that he would play. Elvis spent the afternoon in his motel room, a borrowed acoustic guitar in hand. He hadn't played an acoustic for pleasure in so long. The feel of the unamplified wood against his chest was a forgotten comfort. Picked out chords, simple melodies, old gospel tunes, and blues standards. His voice, for the first time in ages, felt free, unburdened by the expectation of being the voice of Elvis. He was just singing for himself. He thought about the community center, the genuine smiles, the bustling energy, the simple cause of helping animals. It felt pure. He wasn't there for adulation, but for connection. He wasn't there to fill a stadium, but to fill a small hall with sound, just for the love of it. As 7 o'clock approached, he felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. This was different from walking onto a stage in front of thousands. This was more intimate, more vulnerable. He was risking being seen as just a regular person, not the untouchable superstar. Red drove him to the community center. Parking lot was filling up and the hall buzzed with cheerful chatter. People were lined up for hot dogs and lemonade. Elvis pulled his hat low, adjusted his sunglasses, and walked in. Feeling a surprising sense of calm, he found the sign-up sheet for the talent show. There were names like Cindy Lou, Billy Bob, the Johnson family singers. He hesitated, then wrote J. Thomas, a nod to his middle name, Aaron, and a common enough surname. He wouldn't sing any of his hits. He would sing something that came from his heart, something simple. He settled into a seat at the back of the hall, observing a young girl tap danced. A boy played a clumsy but enthusiastic trumpet solo. A woman recited a poem. The audience clapped politely, cheered for effort, and shared a sense of warm community. No one was a critic. Everyone was a neighbor. Then Mr. Henderson, the bake sale boss, walked onto the stage. "All right, folks, next up, we have a new face joining us tonight. Let's give a warm Tupelo welcome to J. Thomas." Elvis felt a jolt. This was it. He walked to the stage, the borrowed acoustic guitar clutched in his hand. The stage lights, simple fluorescence, felt oddly comforting compared to the blinding glare of his usual setups. He reached the microphone, adjusted it, and took a deep breath. He scanned the faces in the audience. He saw Melody, the girl from the diner, sitting with her grandmother, her eyes wide with curiosity. She didn't recognize him, not truly. She just saw a man with a guitar. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the familiar shape of the guitar ground him. He didn't try to be Elvis. He just opened his mouth and let the music flow. He started with an old gospel hymn, Peace in the Valley, a song his mother used to sing, a song filled with hope and comfort. His voice, rich and resonant, filled the room. It wasn't the powerful rock and roll voice of Elvis, the showman. It was softer, more heartfelt, imbued with a raw vulnerability that had been hidden for years. He sang each word with genuine emotion, pouring out the yearning, the quiet sorrow, and the deep desire for peace that had been gnawing at him. The hall went silent, not the empty, haunting silence he knew so well, but a respectful, captivated silence. People leaned forward in their seats. Heads nodded. A few wiped away tears. He saw Melody's grandmother close her eyes, a look of profound peace on her face. He moved into a blues standard, a slow, soulful tune about hardship and resilience. His fingers danced on the fretboard, coaxing sorrowful yet beautiful notes from the old guitar. He wasn't performing, he was sharing. He wasn't demanding applause, he was offering a piece of his soul. When he finished, the silence lingered for a moment, then erupted not in screams, but in a wave of warm, heartfelt applause. This was genuine appreciation, a quiet acknowledgement of shared humanity through music. He bowed his head, a genuine smile gracing his lips. He felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. He hadn't been enough. He had simply been, and it had been enough. As he walked off stage, Melody rushed up to him, her eyes shining. "Mr. Thomas, you were amazing. That was beautiful. You made my grandmother cry, but in a good way," he chuckled. "Glad I could do that, young lady. You have a voice that just goes right to your heart." He looked at her, and in her innocent, open face, he saw the kind of pure connection he had yearned for. No demands, no expectations, just honest emotion. This was the rhythm of connection. Simple and true. He realized that the emptiness wasn't about the applause dying down, but about the applause being the only thing he lived for. Now he felt a deeper, more profound music humming within him, a melody of genuine connection and simple joy. He had found a new song, and it was playing right here in the quiet heart of Tupelo. The next few days were a revelation for Elvis. He stayed in Tupelo, shedding the layers of his persona more completely than he ever had. He went back to the community center not to perform, but to help. He helped Mr. Henderson stack chairs, cleaned up after the bake sale, and even spent an hour fixing the squeaky door to the storage room. He felt a quiet satisfaction in these simple, useful tasks. He learned more about the people he met. Mr. Henderson was a retired music teacher who dedicated his time to local charities. Melody's grandmother, Mrs. Vance, was the Martha from the quilt story. He learned her name was Beatrice, and she lived a few blocks away. She recognized his voice from the talent show, of course, but she didn't connect it to the global superstar. She just said, "Your voice reminds me of a young man I knew long ago, pure as a bell." He cherished that comment more than any review in a music magazine. He found himself drawn to the small local library. He hadn't really read for pleasure in years. Beyond scripts and fan mail, he picked up books on history, on nature, on philosophy. He spent hours just sitting in a quiet corner, absorbing information, letting his mind wander beyond the confines of his own fame. One afternoon, he was helping organize donated books for a library sale when he saw Melody. She was struggling to reach a book on a high shelf. He instinctively stepped forward, reaching over her head to pull down the book she wanted. "Oh, thank you, Mr. Thomas," she chirped. "You're always helping people," he smiled. "Just trying to be useful, Melody." "My grandmother says that's the best way to be," she said, clutching her book. "She says people forget how good it feels to just help." "She's a wise woman, your grandmother," Elvis said, thinking of Mrs. Beatrice Vance and Eleanor's letter. He still hadn't told anyone his true identity. The anonymity felt like a precious gift. Later that day, he found himself visiting Mrs. Vance on her porch, having been invited for sweet tea. Her small, neat house was filled with warmth and the scent of baking. She sat in a rocking chair knitting while Elvis sat opposite her. your singing the other night, mate. It truly touched my heart. It had that raw, honest feeling like when I used to hear that young Presley boy sing in church. There was no pretense, just pure feeling. He swallowed, his heart pounding. This was it, the moment of truth. He could maintain the charade. He looked at her kind, unassuming face, and he knew he could trust her. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice soft. "You know that young Presley boy? That was me. I'm Elvis." She paused, her knitting, her eyes widening slightly, but there was no shock, no gasp, no demand for an autograph, just a gentle understanding in her gaze. "Well, I thought there was something familiar about your voice," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Martha always said you had a good heart, even when the world got hold of you. Your granddaughter, Eleanor, she sent me a quilt," he confessed. "Your Martha's quilt. It's what brought me here," she said. "You thought I might understand loneliness." Beatrice nodded slowly. "Fame, Mr. Presley. It's a mighty bright light, but sometimes the brighter the light, the deeper the shadows it casts. A person can get lost in those shadows, even with all the world cheering." "I felt lost, Mrs. Vance," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Completely lost the applause. It used to fill me up, but then it would die down, and the emptiness, it was deafening. I didn't know who I was without it." "You're still that boy from Tupelo, Mr. Presley?" she said, reaching out to gently pat his hand. "The one with the good heart? You just forgot him for a while. Buried him under all that glitter." "It's easy to do." He felt tears welling in his eyes. "It's never too late to find your way back home, son," she said, her smile radiating warmth. "Home isn't just a place. It's where your heart feels right. And it seems your heart is starting to feel right here, doesn't it?" He nodded, a profound sense of peace settling over him. He realized she was right. The emptiness wasn't about the world, but about his own heart being out of tune. Here in Tupelo, among these simple, kind people, he was finding a new arrangement for his life, a melody that resonated with purpose, connection, and a quiet, heartwarming harmony. He finally understood that the most important applause was the one that came from within. Elvis's time in Tupelo stretched from days into weeks. He continued his quiet life, volunteering, reading, and simply being. Red West, ever loyal, watched him with a relieved expression. He hadn't seen Elvis, this relaxed, this genuinely content, in years. Word eventually trickled back to Graceland about Elvis's extended vacation. Colonel Parker, his manager, was naturally agitated. Phone calls came in, increasingly insistent. "Elvis, the fans are getting restless. The press is asking questions. We need you back, son. There's a new album to promote, a tour to plan." Elvis took the calls, but his responses were different now. He was calm, unhurried. "Colonel, I'm finding something important here," he'd say. "Something I lost. The music's still there, but it's got to come from a different place now." The colonel, ever the businessman, couldn't quite grasp it. "Different place? What are you talking about, son? The stage is where you belong. The fans are waiting." "And I'll be back on stage," Elvis promised, "but on my terms. I can't keep giving from an empty well, Colonel. It ain't fair to me, and it ain't fair to the fans." He spent mornings helping out at the community center, often with Melody and Mrs. Vance. He'd carry boxes, paint walls, and sometimes he'd pick up a guitar and play a quiet tune for the children gathered there, teaching them simple chords or a gospel melody. He saw the pure joy in their faces, untainted by idol worship. This was a different kind of performance, a different kind of connection. One afternoon, a local reporter, hearing whispers of a mysterious man with a beautiful voice helping out at the community center, showed up. He was a young, eager journalist, hoping for a scoop. He saw Elvis, his back to him, helping a group of kids with a painting project. "Excuse me, sir," the reporter said, holding up a camera. "I heard there's a talented musician here, maybe even a famous one. Would you mind telling me your name?" Elvis turned slowly, a hint of his signature, smirk playing on his lips. He looked directly at the reporter. "The name's J. Thomas," he said, his voice level. "And I'm just here helping out. No story here, son." The reporter paused, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He recognized the voice, the look, but something was different. This wasn't the untouchable, larger-than-life Elvis. This was a man with paint on his hands, a genuine smile, and a calm in his eyes that was disarming. He was dressed simply, no sequins, no flashy jewelry. The reporter hesitated. Unsure. He felt a rare moment of respect for the quiet dignity of the man before him. "Right," the reporter finally said, lowering his camera slightly. "Well, good to meet you, Mr. Thomas. Just doing my job." He turned to leave, sensing that pushing further would be disrespectful. He had a story, but it wasn't the one he'd come looking for. It was a story of quiet transformation, not sensationalism. Elvis watched him go, a sense of quiet triumph swelling within him. He had faced the glare of the outside world, and he hadn't flinched, he hadn't hidden. He had presented himself as J. Thomas the man, and it had been enough. He wasn't running from fame, but he was choosing how and when it would define him. That evening he sat on Mrs. Vance's porch, swinging the warm night air, carrying the scent of honeysuckle. "I'm thinking of going back to Graceland soon," he told her, "but it won't be the same." Beatrice nodded, her knitting needles clicking softly. "No, it won't. Because you won't be the same. You found your way back to yourself. That's the hardest journey a person can make. I want to make music again," he continued. "But differently, maybe small venues, maybe just for causes I believe in. I don't know exactly what it will look like yet, but it has to feel right inside," they advised. "It's the most important one." He thought about the roaring crowds, the demands, the relentless pace. He knew he couldn't completely abandon his public life. He was Elvis Presley, and that was a part of him, but he wouldn't let it consume me. He was learning to tune in to a different kind of frequency, one that promised genuine fulfillment, not just fleeting adulation. The emptiness was no longer a vast, howling void. It was a quiet space, ready to be filled with the harmonious rhythm of his own choosing. He felt a profound sense of peace. Back at Graceland, the contrast was stark. Polished floors gleamed, the gilded furniture shimmered, and the silence, while still present, no longer felt haunting. Elvis had changed. He moved through the mansion with a quiet purpose, his steps lighter, his eyes clearer. Colonel Parker arrived within hours of his return, a flurry of demands and anxieties. "Elvis, son, what are we going to tell the press? Where have you been? We've got contracts, appearances, a whole empire depending on you." Elvis sat him down in the living room, pouring him a glass of iced tea. "Colonel," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I'm not disappearing, but things are going to be different. I need to take control of my life, my music, and my peace of mind." The colonel sputtered, shocked by Elvis's newfound resolve. "Control, son? I've always had your best interests at heart." "I know you have, Colonel," Elvis replied, "but my best interests involve more than just album sales and ticket numbers. I need time to breathe. To create, to coin to be music that means something to me. And I'm going to consider more intimate shows, charity events, not just the big arenas." The colonel scoffed. "Intimate shows. Charity. That's not how the king operates, son." "Maybe the king needs to change," Elvis said, a knowing look in his eyes. "Maybe the king needs to remember who he is, without the crown." It wasn't an easy conversation, and it wouldn't be the last, but Elvis held firm. He had found a core strength in Tupelo, a sense of self that wouldn't be swayed by external pressures. He spent his days differently now. He still had his friends around, but he also carved out time for solitude, for reflection. He started playing his guitar again, not the borrowed acoustic from Tupelo, but his own, a beautiful custom-made instrument. He played old gospel songs, blues, and even started writing new melodies. Softer, more introspective tunes. He decided to hold a small private concert at Graceland, inviting only a few close friends, family, and some of the staff who had been with him for years, like Mary. He also sent a special invitation to Mrs. Vance and Melody from Tupelo, arranging for them to travel discreetly. The day of the concert, the atmosphere was different from any other show. No press, no screaming fans, just a small gathering in his living room. He walked in, dressed in a simple, well-tailored suit. No flashy jumpsuits. He picked up his guitar. He looked out at the familiar faces, and then his eyes found Mrs. Vance and Melody. Melody beamed. Her grandmother offered a warm, knowing smile. "Welcome, everyone," Elvis said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "Tonight, I'm going to play some songs that mean a lot to me, some old, some new, but all from the heart." He started with "Peace in the Valley," the same gospel hymn he'd sung in Tupelo. His voice was pure, filled with emotion, raw and beautiful. He wasn't performing, he was sharing. He sang a few blues numbers, then a brand new song he'd written in Tupelo, a poignant ballad about finding home within oneself. The room was silent, captivated. No one screamed, no one pushed forward. They listened, truly listened to the man behind the legend. When he finished, the applause was soft, respectful, and deeply felt. It wasn't the thunderous roar of the Colosseums, but it resonated with a profound meaning. It was the sound of understanding, of connection, of shared humanity. Melody rushed up to him after the performance, giving him a hug. "Mr. Thomas, you were amazing. You were even better than before," she whispered. He smiled, hugging her back. "It's just Elle tonight, honey," Mrs. Vance approached. Her eyes goosebumps. "Mermaid," he nodded, a sense of complete fulfillment washing over him. The emptiness was gone. It had been replaced by this quiet, profound joy. He realized the most important encore wasn't the one demanded by the crowd, but the one that resonated deep within his own heart, the one that celebrated finding his true self. He had faced the silence, and in doing so he had found his true harmony. This was his greatest performance. The encore of the heart life at Graceland settled into a new rhythm. Elvis still recorded music, still made occasional public appearances, but he approached them with a renewed sense of purpose and a clear understanding of his boundaries. The Colonel grumbled, but even he had to admit that Elvis seemed more vibrant, more engaged, and his performances, though fewer, carried a new depth that resonated deeply with his fans. He started dedicating a significant portion of his time to charitable causes, quietly supporting community centers, animal shelters, and music education programs. He would often make unannounced visits, not as Elvis Presley, the king, but as a benefactor, a mentor, sometimes and play guitar for the kids. His connection with Mrs. Vance and Melody deepened. He visited Tupelo regularly, sometimes staying for a few days at the quiet motel. He cherished these visits, the moments of normalcy and genuine human connection. Melody grew up, always bright, always kind. She never asked for anything, just offered her genuine friendship. She later pursued a career in music education inspired by Mr. Thomas and his quiet passion for sharing. Elvis found that the roar of the crowds, when it came, no longer left him feeling hollow. He understood now that it was a transient energy, a beautiful shared moment, but not the source of his happiness. His happiness came from within, from the quiet hum of his own contentment. He learned to embrace the silence, not as an emptiness, but as a space for reflection, for creativity, for peace. Graceland, once a gilded cage, became his sanctuary, a place where he could retreat, recharge, and simply be ill. He still had moments of melancholy, as any human does, but they no longer consumed him. He had found his anchor. He realized that true wealth wasn't measured in gold records or screaming fans, but in the richness of genuine relationships, the quiet satisfaction of converting, and the profound peace of knowing oneself. One quiet evening years later, Elvis sat on the porch at Graceland, watching the sun set over the sprawling lawn. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of magnolias. He held an old, worn acoustic guitar in his lap, the very one he'd borrowed in Tupelo. It had become a treasured possession, a tangible reminder of his journey back to himself. He strummed a few chords, a simple, heartfelt melody. It wasn't loud, wasn't flashy. It was a tune born of quiet reflection, of gratitude, of a soul at peace. He hummed along, his voice soft, rich, and full of emotion. The haunting emptiness that had once defined his private moments had long since vanished. It was replaced by a gentle melody, a quiet harmony that resonated deep within him. He had found his way back home, not just to Tupelo, but to the true heart of himself. The applause still came, but it was just a beautiful sound now, no longer a desperate craving. He had finally found a different kind of melody, and it was the most heartwarming song he had ever known. He was El, and he was finally, truly whole.